Hey there, fellow bookworms, and welcome to a brand new episode of Nerd Notes Book Club. I'm Steve.
And I'm Marina, and let's get ready to dive into this literary contagious adventure.
That's right, Marina. Today we're unpacking a classic that's as timely as it is thought-provoking, The Plague by Albert Camus. Don't worry, folks. We're here to give you a taste of the book's essence and not the plague itself. We'll try to make it plague-tastically engaging. Before we begin, here is a brief summary of Albert Camus' life. Albert Camus was born in Algeria in 1913 to French parents, and he studied philosophy at the University of Algiers and began his career as a journalist.
During World War II, he joined the French resistance and was editor-in-chief of the underground newspaper Combat. After the war, he became a successful novelist, playwright, and essayist, and he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1957.
He died in a car accident in 1960. Camus' work explored the themes of the absurd, rebellion, and solidarity. He was a major figure in the existential movement, but he rejected the label of existentialist. He believed that life is absurd. He was an absurdist, but that we should still strive to live with meaning and dignity. Wait, can we pause?
Some of Camus'...
I just want to break that down for the audience. That
Sure,
difference.
go ahead.
What are your thoughts? Existentialist versus absurdist in that situation?
Well, I think this is a distinction that probably confuses a lot of people, and I'm obviously not an expert by any means, but the way that I conceive of the two is that existentialism is the blanket philosophy that many philosophers have spoken about, but absurdism is sort of a subsect within existentialism. That absurdism is accepting that the universe is meaningless and that we have really no power over it necessarily so much, but that you can find meaning similar to existentialism. But I think that absurdism is also appreciating the fact that life is ultimately absurd, whereas existentialism doesn't quite do that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Camus, he kind of, is a contrarian to a certain extent. I don't think there's that big of a difference between the two at the end of the day for like layman folk. But if you're a philosophy PhD, you're going to like argue it super hardcore. I think both kind of think there's no like God structure, real meaning, but you should try to get you could still try to get your meaning and happiness out of life. So I think the difference is a lot smaller than a lot of people would say. If there's
I would definitely agree. I think they're definitely, one is the side of the other, for they're one of the same coin. There's slight distinctions, but they're ultimately very, very similar. So with you on that one.
Okay,
but thank you for breaking that up. So back to Camus. Some of Camus' most famous works included the novels The Stranger, The Plague, and The Fall. There's also the philosophical essay The Myth of Sisyphus, which Steve and I have tried to dissect, and the play Caligula.
Camus' work continues to be read and studied today. He's considered one of the most important writers of the 20th century.
So now let's do a brief synopsis. So The Plague is set in the town of Oran in Algeria, where a sudden outbreak of a deadly plague turns the lives of the inhabitants upside down. Dr. Roux, our protagonist, becomes a witness to both the physical suffering and the emotional toll the plague takes.
And just like that, life in the town becomes a metaphorical reflection of the human condition. The book delves into the themes of isolation, suffering, and the struggle to find meaning in the face of a seemingly indifferent universe. One of the reasons why this book we read is because of COVID, a lot of analogies to COVID, which we'll talk about later. Also, apparently the bubonic plague in this book was a metaphor for the Germans that invaded France during World War II. I don't think we talked about that the first time we...
No, honestly, I kind of wish that we did some pre-work for the book, because now that I see it, I can't unsee it. And it kind of drove me crazy. I'm like, damn it, how did we... I mean, I know why we didn't think of it, but it's such an interesting metaphor. And it makes so much sense that this takes place in the 40s, obviously during World War II, and he sees the plague as what was happening to France in that period of time. So for anyone who has not read it, that's an interesting dynamic to look at for the book.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that's good about book clubs, is kind of figuring out those different aspects that you would not have figured out on your own reading a book. How many times have people read books on their own and they don't have these epiphanies or realizations? And this adds like this extra level to the book, because I thought Camus was writing it just from like a plague perspective, like he knows about the bubonic plague. If I was reading it and I almost want to read it again with that in mind, and to understand that the plague are the Germans coming in World War II. Credit goes to a podcast which I listened to prepare for this, which will include the link in the details of the video.
To get you all better situated for the book, we're going to do a little character summary.
So I'm going to start with one of the main characters, or the main character, Dr. Bernard Roux. He's the narrator and the protagonist of the novel. He's a doctor who works in Oran and is one of the first to recognize the plague. He's a compassionate and selfless man, almost like ridiculously selfless, who dedicates himself to treating the sick and dying, even when he knows that he could be infected himself. So he's like your hero, really.
Then there's Jean Thoreau. He's a friend of Roux who comes to Oran after the plague outbreak. He's a writer who is interested in the nature of evil and suffering. So he joins Roux in his work to fight the plague and comes to see it as an opportunity to learn more about himself and the human condition.
Yeah. And something that I heard in that podcast that I really liked is the fact that Camus tends to instill a part of himself in all of the characters. So I'm not really sure what Camus' overall character traits are, but that's interesting to know that he's kind of like he sprinkles himself in all the characters.
Yeah, and I noticed that. Oh no, sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it. You noticed, yeah.
No, so with that comment, I noticed that when you look at Jean Thoreau and Dr. Roux, and their names are similar, the French, they have a very similar philosophy when it comes to understanding the human nature, human suffering, the human condition. And so you could see the little sprinklings that he puts in others, even if all the characters are not necessarily the same or think the same.
That's a good point. That's a good point. The next character is Raymond Rambert. Raymond Rambert, who's a journalist who's trapped in Oran by the plague. He initially tries to escape, but he eventually comes to terms with the situation and joins Roux in his work. By initially, it's like 90% of the book. He's trying to escape.
Yeah, he makes an effort. Then there's the character who I think sticks out the most for me because let me just get into him. So Cotard.
Yep.
Cotard. He's a criminal who is released from prison when the plague, starts. And when the town of Oran is quarantined, he is initially relieved to be free, but then he soon begins to fear that he'll be punished for his crimes. So he eventually finds redemption by helping Roux and Thoreau, although his ending is a little tragic, depending on how you feel about this particular character.
Yeah, he was probably the only person that was really happy about the plague.
Yeah, he was ecstatic. Everyone else is just suffering through their misery, and he's like, this is great, loving every second, because he's not getting caught. He's like, any second something bad is going to happen, but as long as there's a quarantine, I'm safe, no one cares about me, which I guess silver lining, but things take a turn.
Yeah, which makes me think of all the people that I knew that were happy during COVID. Like not just happy during COVID, that were like, oh, I'm even more happy than I was before. And, a lot of people, because they were working from home, they had much better work schedules. And it also makes me think, when there's a war, I bet there's people that are really happy that that's happening. Like some dark humor, like the war in Ukraine. Imagine you're a murderer on the loose in Ukraine, and all of a sudden you're getting invaded. You don't have to worry about being caught for murder because
Well, that's actually very interesting. So I feel like when you brought up the very last part about someone who's a criminal, at that point, that person is probably, if they're male, recruited into the thing. So I guess it's like, well, you're fighting a war, so at least you're not being prosecuted. And yeah, I could see it.
Yeah. But I guess less dark humor would be during COVID, even though, COVID was bad, but still, we all know people that during COVID, most people we know during COVID were upset about it. Not only collectively upset for humanity and their people, but also themselves being stuck. But I knew I think at least 10, 20% of the people I knew were actually like happy about it. Especially if you're an introvert and you don't want to hang out anyway. Perfect excuse.
So actually, this is later on. I think I'm going to delve into this a little bit more. So I'm afraid to even share too many of my thoughts on this one yet. So we'll.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure for some of the questions we put some, we already answered some of them just with this commentary, but it's better than us reading some silly script that ChatGPT generated.
Next, come on, just not share the secret.
You're right. It was Google Bard.
To be fair, I would never. Yeah, no, I would not say what we're saying. But go ahead.
Next character is Father Penelou. He was a Jesuit priest who gives series of sermons on the plague. He initially believes that the plague is a punishment from God, but he eventually comes to see it as a test of faith. Interesting.
Then, oh, sorry, was there more?
No, just said interesting.
Yes, no, that's another character that stuck out for me. Maybe we'll talk about him a bit more, but Joseph Grand, he's a petty official who is obsessed with writing a novel. He writes one sentence over and over again ad nauseum. So he is initially reluctant to help Dr. Roux, but he eventually comes to see it as an opportunity to prove himself. So let's do some questions.
Let's do it. So let's kick off this book club session with a twist. If you, Marina, were stuck in a town facing a plague, what's the one item you'd hoard? Toilet paper?
Yeah, honestly, I don't want to be trite with this, but I swear to God, okay, so I didn't appreciate toilet paper until it was gone. And I know it's stupid, but like toilet paper is so valuable and you could do so. That's my answer. It's toilet paper. It's weird, but that's the one thing I panicked about initially. And yeah, that's what I'm hoarding.
I'm trying to think during COVID what I hoarded. I think it was like wine and beer for like Friday nights because we did Friday night dinners with friends and stuff. And
I wasn't invited.
Yeah, well, we thought you were there, but we didn't invite you. It was so weird. So I think I hoarded that, and I definitely had a bout of like slight alcoholism during COVID because it was like the only thing you could do. You're like, you can't do anything, you can't go anywhere. So what do? You sit around with friends and people, or maybe even by yourself, and you drink some wine, drink some beer. And I think I ended up having it even during the work week. And then I was like, very quickly, I was like, all right, I'm an alcoholic, and I stopped drinking so much alcohol. So yeah, I hoarded that. Toilet paper wasn't a problem because I was working in the pharmacy. So I had access to toilet paper and all that stuff. But if I wasn't working in the pharmacy, I probably would hoard toilet paper as well, even though we have a bidet. But you still need the toilet paper for the bidet because even though it like cleans the yuck, you still have to dry it, your stuff.
You could get like a butt towel, so it's reusable, so you're not wasting it because it's clean already.
Yeah.
Do they make butt towels for bidets? That should be a thing, like a little towel that you put like next to the bidet.
Yeah, they make these towels that are like this big that are specifically for that purpose. It's not only for bidets, it's also just in general, even if you don't have bidet. But some bidets have the blow dryer. Ours doesn't. We had one that had the blow dryer, but there's ones that will wash and then it will dry your stuff.
That sounds like an experience.
And actually, bidets sales went up like crazy during COVID because of this reason, because of the toilet paper problem. I remember that.
See, that makes sense. And this is too much of a tangent, but I'd be so curious to see what is more, I guess, environmentally friendly, considering the water that's wasted with bidets versus the paper that's wasted with toilet paper. Like, I wonder what the balancing act is, because I've seen arguments that the hand dryers that we use are also kind of wasteful because they use energy and sometimes more so than the paper towels. So I'm not an expert, so just
They also blow
throwing it out
bacteria
there.
in the guns compared
Yes,
to
that
all the people.
I've heard that too. Yeah,
So,
for sure.
mhm.
All right. But that's a very good question. So, question two, Camus uses the plague as a metaphor for various things. How do you think this story relates to our own experiences during the COVID pandemic?
So kind of like I said before, how different people responded to it. You know, we all know people that were really extreme and would mask up while biking or would mask up on a canoe in the middle of the Hudson River, like someone did at some point. And then there's people that were like making out with everybody. It was like, I want to get COVID. And then it seemed at some point that there was like nobody that was really taking it like being in the middle. And then slowly but surely more people were kind of responding to it. So to it like not realistically, but moderately. So that was interesting experience. And then trying to figure out it, and politically it was weird too, because I knew people both on the left and the right that were represented on the really conservative side with it, masking everywhere. And I knew people on the right and left that were just like, F this. So it's almost like it created like this new divide. Like before COVID, there was like the Trump versus not Trump divide. And then after it, it became like a further divide. It was the Trump maskers, the Trump non-maskers, and then the non-Trump maskers, non-Trump maskers. And then all four of us were like, you suck. So what about you?
So what I found really interesting, and this is, I'm gonna dig into my notes here a little bit. One of the metaphors that Camus explores is that indifference and denial constitute the metaphorical disease. That this disease, I mean, the book is not, it's about a plague, but it's not really about a plague. It's about the human condition and how humans react to things that they can't control. And one of these reactions is indifference and denial, which is why a lot of people in the book, when it starts, there's rationalization of what's happening. People are rationalizing the rats that are dying in the streets. People are still going out extensively, and they continue to even when quarantine starts, because they're trying to hold on to their last inkling of their lifestyles. And I think that during our pandemic, there was this element of indifference in some people, and there was this element of denial in some people. And obviously, I think there was a very strong desire to rationalize, which I think is just so, it's just a human nature. And I mean, we've done so many studies on the fact that the rise of conspiracy theories correlate very strongly with tragic events, because the human mind can't help accept things that we can't explain. There's a need to explain it away. And that's one way of coping. So I see some elements, some of those parallels from the book.
That makes sense. The Jews caused it to happen. Joke. At the top of every conspiracy theory.
We're getting canceled before we even start.
Hey, as long as you're saying it's a joke, it's fine. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. I'm Jewish, so I can say that. Anyway, so I don't know why ChatGPT told me to say great segue, Marina. I don't know where the segue is, but
make it sound sincere. Just be sincere when you say it.
It's going to be very hard. What do you think Dr. Rue's actions reveal about the human spirit when faced with adversity? Ooh, okay.
Yeah, so this was a hard one. It's a hard one because, I mean, we know, or for those who read the book, we know what his actions were. It was him fighting the disease, even while knowing that he might not be successful. It's about the fact that no matter how much the human spirit is tested, and even if a person fails, there's still that inherent drive, the basic human will to survive that continues on. And in some ways, this book reminds me of Man's Search for Meaning.
I was just thinking that, as you said.
Which is another book that we read.
Yeah, we'll definitely
a
have to
while back.
Sure, with our friend Leo Casa. Yep.
Yes. Yeah. So that is an incredible book. In that book, he talks about why did some people survive the Holocaust? Why did people survive the concentration camps while some others didn't? And it's this idea of hope, this idea that there has to be something on the other side. There has to be a reason to keep fighting. And I think that that's ultimately what Dr. Ru does. He sort of demonstrates the fact that there is this basic drive coupled with this idea of we must fight a losing battle, but what matters is to keep fighting, even if you know you might never win. And that's what unites people together. And that resiliency is what gives us the drive and our hope to keep going forward.
Yeah. And how do you keep that spirit up? What is good spirit, bad spirit? And I think that's very underrated. You know, even from a depression, anxiety, suicide perspective, how could those people have been set up better from the get-go? So yeah. Part of it is biology. In the podcast, they mentioned that plague is basically where biology and mathematics meet. So you have biology, we're humans, and then you have a 75% mortality rate with bubonic plague. So basically, it's like the ultimate equalizer of the population. There's no class separation. So how do you get set up? How do you set yourself up spirit-wise, healthy? So when bad things happen, like a plague or a death in the family, how can you be set up well for that? So, and that's a whole, philosophical question. I like what ChatGPT wrote for you for the question 4 to segue it. That's nice.
Allow me to embrace the ChatGPT with this one. Speaking of adversity, Steve, question 4. How does the government's response to the plague in the book compare to real-world government responses to global crises?
Yeah, I mean, very similar.
This is such a difficult, I'm sorry, but this is such a difficult question, but go ahead.
Really? I thought it was, I think it's pretty simple. Like, the government tries to do something for the public health reasons, and most people follow along. Some people don't, and then they have to sometimes take measures to keep on adjusting to the people that are not responding to the government response. The other thing is, like, correct me if I'm wrong with this book. Did they talk about how, like, the politics of, like, how they'll communicate it, or am I just a figment of my imagination?
So initially, their initial efforts was the printing in the newspaper. So they did a very similar thing to what happened during our pandemic, where they would very slowly but surely start reporting more and more about what was happening and printing statistics. And one of the fruitless efforts was to put up posters, which everyone disregarded, but then eventually Dr. Ru and Tarot tried to do sort of a volunteer thing where they tried to recruit people to participate in helping because they needed the manpower. So it was kind of like a ground on the ground kind of roots effort to get everyone going. So the government was, in my perception, maybe someone can correct me, is that the government didn't do as much as the characters in the book.
Solid point, Marina.
Thank you.
So the plague explores tensions between personal freedom and collective responsibility. I like that. How do you balance these two aspects in your own life? That's cool.
I don't know. I don't know how to address this question, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I understand what the question is asking, and I think there's definitely a balance between the two of understanding where does your personal freedom end and the rights of others begin. So I obviously, or maybe not obviously, but I always try to operate in a way such that my freedom does not impose on other people's freedoms. But I think something that is a shortcoming of mine is that I would not identify myself as an individual who goes out of their way for collective responsibility outside of my loved ones.
Makes sense.
So
I think it's also hard to do that, especially when we're not, like, born to, like, billionaires. You know, if my dad was a billionaire, I might be able to spend like a lot of my time helping and like volunteering and going out of my way. But I was born to like middle class, in middle class, and still am middle class. So you kind of have to do a lot of helping yourself in order to help others, a small amount, at least now. Personal freedom and collective responsibility. Maybe that's about like climate change kind of stuff. Like, how much do you try to, you know, consume less stuff in order to affect the climate less? I don't know. I don't know if there's that tension. I guess for me, it's the tension of time. You know, how much time do I have for myself and like my loved ones, and how much time do I have for the collective?
Very thought-provoking question, Steve.
Thank you,
Question
ChatGPT.
6. The character Thoreau sets out to fight the plague, but he's also dealing with his own inner struggles. How do you interpret his character's journey?
So like Taru has like an ideology not to hurt other people and is very against that. Meanwhile, Ru is all about helping other people and just serving up his services to other people. Taru kind of is a little bit more selfish, I guess, even though he was helping Ru. He had the daddy issues. So what's one lesson you've learned from the characters in The Plague that you can apply to your own life?
Things are going to come to an end, and to not wait for a tragedy to happen in order to appreciate the people around you or the life around you. And there are so many parallels that are made throughout the book about how does one actually notice time. So in the very beginning, Dr. Ru sort of, I would say in a way, the way that he writes about the citizens of Oran is by talking about how menial their everyday life is, how they're part of these habits. They're just going like a hamster in a wheel, and none of them are really living their life to the fullest. And when things start to shut down is when they go through their cycle of denial, fear, acceptance, but then strong feelings of missing the life they had before. And I think that ultimately so much about what this book is about is just, I guess, how meaningful life is once you decide to make it meaningful, and that power is always within our hands, to recognize that and to not wait for something bad to happen.
Yeah. I guess back to the point of the human spirit, just maybe when times are good, that's the best time to build your human spirit. That way, when things are bad, you can weather the storm. From the characters. Yeah. I mean, those are the people that survived are the ones that nobody that survived were like really bad people, I guess. Or maybe they were, I don't know.
Well, what I
I
found
mean,
interesting in this particular book is that it was almost irrelevant who died and who lived in the book, because it just showed that the reality is cruel. That
that's
that
true.
horrible scene of Mr. Othan's son
Oh yeah.
that we
Yeah.
discussed before, but
Horrid. That was
you know,
horrid.
the death of the innocents, the priest Panalu, he also succumbs to a disease. A lot of the heroes succumb to the disease. So it's not whether or not you will die, because everyone will die. It's just
Yeah.
those moments before it and how the person learns to accept it. And the book also portrays the emotional toll of isolation. How has your perspective on isolation shifted after reading The Plague, and also in light of the pandemic?
I didn't really have isolation personally because I was working in the pharmacy. I had a good group of friends and family that I kept seeing during COVID. However, so fortunately, didn't really have isolation at all, but it kind of reinforced how isolation could be very bad, because I saw some people struggling with it, and I could imagine how it could be struggling. It could be a struggle for a lot of people. Um, I even before COVID, I know like we I think people knew about social isolation before COVID to a certain extent. But the pandemic definitely stepped it up another notch for everybody. What about you?
So this is where it's kind of a paradox for me of what happened. And I think people have asked and I have trouble putting into words, but in a weird way, I feel like I felt less isolated during the pandemic
Hmm.
because I think I'm already fairly isolated as a person. And so almost, this is going to sound sadistic kind of, but just almost knowing that everyone is isolated made me feel less alone.
Yeah, yeah.
So in a weird way, I felt
Misery loves company. Yeah,
right. And it's not like I was necessarily miserable. And I guess this is also comes down to the luck of the draw that people have different personality traits, that for some isolation for them they're fine, they're able to operate, but for other personalities for them it's much more of a struggle. And I just felt like, yeah, in a weird way, because everyone's going through the same struggle right now, you feel like you're a bit more unified with everybody, and it felt, yeah, it really felt kind of connected. So
right. Yeah, I agree. The novel raises questions about the meaning of life. How do the characters find meaning in the midst of suffering? And how can we apply that in our lives?
so I think, yeah, the characters definitely diverged in their idea of the meaning of life. So, obviously taking the priest, he had a different philosophy, which was more religion based. Dr. Rue, who is, I guess, the protagonist that we can focus on, his conclusion on the meaning of life is the need to continue to fight for meaning, even if you can't find a moral or rational reason for what's happening. So that it is in uniting together and in searching for meaning that we can all lower the suffering of others.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Rue was very clear in how he did it. He found meaning through helping other people, and then helping other people help other people. So it's like you're coach to coach. So not only was he coaching other people to be healthier, but he was coaching people to coach other people to be healthier. So spreading the health way further out. The other characters, how do they find meaning? What I said before with Teru, he found it through kind of almost like helping himself. Like, I don't know, like he helped other people, but he also did it in like an anti killing kind of way, in a weird way. The journalist, I mean, he kept on trying to leave the entire time. So I don't know if that's maybe his
But
meaning is like,
he did change his mind at the end.
yeah, he changed his mind at the end. How did he? But I guess his meaning before changing his mind was escaping, breaking through. Like, I can get out of this. Um, Father Penelo, like you mentioned, he did it through service to God. Um, Joseph Grand through his writing and constant writing. Um, I mean, that's why Rue is the protagonist, because while everybody else is like kind of like up and down, whether they're doing something good or not, he at least was very stable in his service to other people and decreasing suffering and pain for everybody around him. And even when he never picked fights with people too. So like people would pick fights with him, right? The journalist or whatever kept on trying to get him to be like, and he would always be the bigger man.
Last but not least, so the plague leaves us pondering the absurdity of life. What's one absurd thing that you've embraced that you've laughed about this year? So embraced or laughed about this year?
Absurd thing. I think it's the war in Ukraine. Definitely not laughed at it, but more like embraced it, because it's such a tragedy that's horrible. And being born in Ukraine, it's even more connected to me. And the fact that I never visited since leaving there has been ridiculous. And I had a very absurd feeling where, like, it's what's the meaning of this war? It's hard to find any meaning to it. So I've kind of embraced it that, first of all, war happens. It's tragedy. There's no meaning to it. And furthermore, there's not much that we as individuals can do about it unless we're the president of either Russia or Ukraine. There's not much power that we have in it. So I think there's something you have to kind of, there's absurd things that happen that have no meaning that you have no control over. So don't like harp on it. Don't have it control your life. Then there's absurd things that happen in your own life, and maybe those you can control. You know, like you could have something absurd happen to you that's ridiculous, but it could have happened because of your actions. It could have been happening because of your inaction. Health, all that kind of stuff can happen because you're not taking care of yourself. So, yeah.
Yeah.
What about you?
That's a good one. Somber note.
You laughed about.
Honestly, I haven't fully thought about it, so it might take some time for me to come up with an answer.
Yeah, that's fine. All right. So now, I am Albert Camus. Hello, bonjour. And I'm going to do my best to do a French accent. It may be very terrible, or it may be very amazing. We shall see.
How's your French accent coming? Look, I got shoulder. What do you call them? Elbow patches.
Elbow pads. Elbow patches. Yeah. Bonjour, Marina. Comment allez-vous?
Comment allez-vous?
Très bien, très bien.
Bien.
Commence.
Très bien. Alors, nous allons faire une interview, peut-être? All right.
Je ne comprends.
Tu ne comprends pas? Mais vous êtes français, n'est-ce pas?
Non.
All right.
Je
Somebody took French in 6th grade and doesn't remember it.
Je parle accent.
Yes, your accent is très excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special guest with us today, the renowned philosopher and author Albert Camus. Mr. Camus, welcome. So I'm going to hit you with some tough questions from the beginning. I hope you're right with that. So in light of the pandemic and your philosophical perspectives, how do you view the situation?
Thank you for having me. The parallels between the current pandemic, the themes explored in the plague are indeed striking. In both cases, we witness the unexpected disruption of daily life, the isolation that ensues, and the struggle to find the meaning in the face of suffering and uncertainty.
Wow, brilliant. Can't even have a next question, but how would your philosophical ideas, particularly your concept of the absurd, apply to the pandemic?
Excellent question. The absurdity of life, as I've written about, lies in the tension between our longing for meaning and the inherent meaninglessness of the universe. The pandemic has underscored the fragility of human existence and the unpredictable nature of events. While we strive for order and purpose, events like these remind us that chaos and randomness can disrupt our plans at any moment.
So true. So brilliant. Your protagonist, Dr. Roux, was dedicated to fighting the plague in the novel. How would you interpret the response of healthcare workers and individuals during the pandemic?
Not an excellent question. Dr. Roux exemplifies the absurd hero, someone who confronts life's challenges despite their inherent meaninglessness. Healthcare workers and individuals who've stepped up during the pandemic are, in a way, embodying this idea. Their dedication reflects a commitment to humanity, even in the face of overwhelming odds.
Yeah. Very, very true. Now, let's touch upon isolation. Your novel explores themes of isolation and the struggle to find meaning. How do you think people have coped with isolation and the disruption of daily life during the pandemic?
Isolation, while physically necessary, can exacerbate the existential isolation we often experience in our lives. However, it can also lead to the introspection and a reevaluation of what truly matters. Many have turned to art, literature, and introspective journeys to find solace and meaning during these times.
All right. Now, what about the tension between personal freedom and collective responsibility? You also touched upon that in your book. How would you advise society to navigate the balance of these two elements during the pandemic or otherwise?
Hmm. The tension between personal freedom and collective responsibility is indeed a complex one. Balancing individual rights with the well being of the community requires a delicate equilibrium. It demands a recognition that our actions can have far reaching consequences for others. Society must strive for a harmonious coexistence of individual autonomy and collective well being.
Well said, monsieur. Now, Mr. Camus, your insights are indeed very thought-provoking, as always. How do you think people can find meaning and purpose amid the challenges posed by something like a pandemic?
Amid challenges, meaning can often be found through acts of compassion, connection, and creativity. Engaging with others, even virtually, and pursuing creative endeavors can provide a sense of purpose. Additionally, acknowledging the impermanence of life can lead us to appreciate the present moment and the relationships that matter most. Uh,
Oh my, bravo, monsieur, bravo. Thank you, Monsieur Camus, for sharing your perspective on the situation. Your words continue to resonate and offer us insight into navigating these complex times.
It's been a pleasure to engage in this dialogue. Remember, while we grapple with the absurdity of life, our ability to choose our responses remains a powerful tool. Let us find hope and meaning even in the face of uncertainty.
Brilliant. Now, thank you for joining us, and your wisdom is much appreciated, even though, Mr. Camus, you have left before I had the chance to
Great.
say my final remarks.
Yeah.
Oh, Steve, you're back.
Oh yeah, I'm great. That was I have a headache.
That was excellent.
Anyway, and there you have it, folks. The Plague, a book that's like a philosophical puzzle with a contagious twist, pun intended. If you enjoyed our book club session, give us some love by subscribing to our channel, liking this video, sharing it with your fellow book aficionados, and most importantly, commenting. We want your comments below. That's how you can actually be part of the book club, whether you read the book years ago, just read it, didn't read it, you could still comment on your views about absurdism and all that stuff. Oh wait,
Yeah.
I just
You just cut me right off. But
Oops.
to second your point, as some people may notice, Steve and I have not read the book recently either. It was within this calendar year.
Yes.
So feel free to destroy us in a respectful manner.
Especially my French accent.
That was the best part, honestly.
Yeah, I think I had a 5% good accent hit rate. It was like 5%.
Honestly, no. I'm sweating balls. I think that was really, really good. Like, it feels like you practice a lot. Either that or you have a natural skill for accents, because I thought that was great.
Yeah, appreciate it.
I could not do that.
Let's see what the viewers think.
No one's gonna watch this.
Yeah, they will.
Except for our moms.
And our group text.